Hello there everyone, I hope my video finds you well, inshallah. Welcome to another online lecture in your course in literature. This time dealing with American literature. We will be discussing and continuing the aspects that we've started highlighting in the previous sessions in the classroom, mainly American Romanticism and Transcendentalism. So we've mentioned that the Romantic movement started in Germany and then it moved to England, but it reached America in a later stage. However, it was distinctive and kind of special to that Americanness. It is said that American Romanticism was rooted in its American Renaissance and distinctiveness, and this has made it special because for them, being reborn again or being resurrected gave them the chance to relive life as purely and as distinctively as possible. For the American people, it was high time for them to try new things and detach themselves from the notions of the past. So being resurrected for them is similar to understanding that it was preferable if they learn from the mistakes of the past and try to forge a new style of life that made them special as individuals. Also, self-awareness was highly fortified. Self-awareness in American Romanticism meant that human beings were aware about themselves and their lives, and that kind of awareness gave them power, strength, and helped them to better construct their personalities. Another important aspect that American Romanticism focused on, besides individuality, distinctiveness, and Renaissance, was the aspect of the sublime. Of course, the sublime, which meant the effect of beauty in grandeur, in greatness, helped uniting a human being as a subjective, emotional self to the natural world or nature as an objective external aspect. So for them, they have seen nature and the human being as one. We will see and discuss this in the coming slides. But here, just slightly explaining this, they have seen a human being in harmony with nature, in relation to nature. So for them, they have understood that the individual, with his moral duty, is obligated to reform in society and to balance and equalize the inequalities in order to relieve human suffering. So being in alliance with nature has made things distinguished for the American individual, and it brought with it another notion known as Transcendentalism, which was a reaction against the 18th century rationalism and the movement of Enlightenment that focused on logic, but manifested on the general humanitarian trend of the 19th century thought. So this movement was based on the belief that the unity of man and God is one, and the soul of every individual was thought to be identical with the world. It was a kind of microcosm of the world where the structure of man and God was one. Of course, here, if you could remember, we've discussed this when we were dealing with British Renaissance and mainly with humanism. One of the aspects of humanism was that they have seen human potential as identical to that of the divine. Of course, this was not blasphemous at the time because it was not until recently, during the 20th, 21st centuries, that philosophers were trying to re-explain this aspect as the absence of God and the dominance of the individual. But back then, during the Renaissance, the British Renaissance, the 15th and the 16th centuries, the aspect of humanism gave importance to human thinking and human capacities to create and prosper in society. This Transcendentalism, of course, was inspired from the idea of humanism, and they have seen that a human being has to be represented as the small order in the universe. So the harmony that God has created in structures is of a higher importance, and we have discussed this in first year when we were explaining, if you could remember, and you could go back to that course on the channel, we were explaining the relationship of man and universe in Surah 13, and I have said that there is a microcosm represented in the human being as being the smaller order, but who goes in harmony with the cosmos. Of course, the structure of the way the world is constructed and the way the human body and the human mind were constructed is deeply highlighted in this notion of transcendentalism and humanism. I hope this is clear. Of course, the characteristics of transcendentalism focused or fortified the individual differences and the unique viewpoint of the individual, the individual virtue and happiness depending on self-realization. And if you could pay attention to these three main characteristics, you can see that they are similar to the English Renaissance or British Renaissance humanism, where the individual's point of view was important and his self-realization was major. Of course, here the individual difference means that a human being should not imitate. You have your own ideas, you have your own personality, and on the basis of that special features that you possess, you should contribute into society or in society. Human virtue is important. It was inspired from the Greeks and Romans, and it helps identifying the way the human being functions in society, because a virtuous person and vice person are never the same. Virtuous person can add positively to society and can work society and his surroundings better than the one who is vice. So here let's read together and explain. So Transcendentalism depends upon the reconciliation of two universal psychological tendencies, which are the expansive or self-transcending aspect, a desire to embrace the whole world, to know and become one with the world, the thing that we've mentioned, the oneness of man and nature, and also it has a contradicting, self-asserting tendency, which is the desire to withdraw and remain unique. So you need that oneness with society and with nature, because it gives you harmony to understand the world around you, but also you will represent your ideas different from your peers and the rest of society. The concept of dualism in American Transcendentalism is twofold. It is based on psychological aspects, where for them the individual has to be contradicting, has to be unique, different, special, with a racial identity and an ego-centered personality. And on the other side of things, the same individual has to show kind of expansive spirit, where he has to be similar and involved with others and a part of the human race itself. So this altruism, which is showing selfless behavior and being kind of caring about the human race, is significant to highlight here. The way we can explain this is through trying to imagine how can a human being be distinctive, special, and different in behavior, and at the same time caring. I don't know if it is possible for you to imagine yourself to be selfish, but at the same time caring. In my opinion, the way or the better way to understand this is not to focus on these two contradicting traits in the human being, but to try to comprehend this as reflecting each other in a positive way. Of course, selfishness here means that the human being has to be distinctive, different, has to show the unique side of him or her. And that distinctiveness, uniqueness, and contradiction will help him be different. In that difference, he can bring newness to society. In that difference, he can add his own spices to society. And by doing so, and if everyone of that culture was doing so, they will show a kind of racial identity, which is different, but at the same time will contribute in the general well-being of the entire community. I hope this is clear. So here, generally, American Transcendentalism pushed radical individualism because they saw themselves as explorers outside society, as if they have thought of themselves to be one, different and unique or special, but at the same time that kind of amazing magical creativeness that they bring because of their egoism and special identity will eventually contribute to the well-being of a higher, bigger, and more prosperous society. So the idea of transcending, which means to rise above or beyond animalistic impulses of life or animal drives, is what made American people distinctive. Of course, this is easy to comprehend because, there are always two sides of man. We have said this many times. We have the animalistic, bestial nature and the social, cultural, more, let's say, tamed, domesticated nature. Of course, transcendentalists and romantics gave more attention and accentuated on the positive side of man, and that positiveness for them is what can make things better and develop. So we have to be respected, we have to always transcend, because eventually we all have that portion of the oversoul, the divine. In general, we can link this to the idea of God as attributing his qualities to the human being, the positive qualities to the human being. And this is also a concept which was inspired from Renaissance humanism. And to understand this, you can always link it to the notion of ladun. When we say, for example, in Arabic, وَهَبْ لَنَا مِنْ لَدُنْكَ رَحْمَةً, as if it is from God's soul, from God's mercy, from God's generosity. So this kind of portion, of course, does not make man as God, but the good qualities can elevate them, can exceed them to be better, and always aim higher. For the Romantics and Transcendentalists, God is always found in nature and in human nature, in the physical nature and the human nature. And they consider that miracles of the Bible are no longer needed. Here you can see the detachment from the Puritanistic beliefs of miracles, not because miracles cannot come true, but for the Romantics, they saw themselves to be the miracle. They are the miracle of God on earth. So man has got potential to create miracles. So don't wait for miracles to happen to you. It's high time you stood up and work and develop in your society. One of the ideologies essential to understand in American Romanticism or Transcendentalism is the concept of self-reliance. Last time we've explained briefly that self-reliance means to depend on oneself and to be able to control yourself by reference to society and try to conduct your character by reference to you as an individual, because for them the individual is important. Self-reliance is basically focused or synthesized upon the idea of intuition and natural instincts, as if man has the capacity to feel things and has the power to decide by himself. So in nature for them, they see that, or say, as far as nature is concerned and human nature is concerned, they see themselves to be uncorrupted. That common sense, that the human being was born with elevates him to think in a pure, healthy way and to be uncorrupted. So according to the leader of Transcendentalism, Ralph Waldo Emerson, he believes that the human being is sane because of his common sense. He is only corrupted when indulging and being indulged in society and being influenced by people, negative people. As long as man is negatively, let's say, contaminated, he or she starts to conform to social norms that corrupts him or her. According to Emerson, he believes that we are born pure, but society misguides us and corrupts us as we grow old. Society demands conformity, and conformity kills individuality. Of course, he strengthens the idea of distinctiveness. Man has to be distinctive in order for him to ignite. So conforming to social rules leads to self-destruction, because this, according to Emerson, kills creativity. One of the leading figures in American Transcendentalism, and mainly the founder of this movement, Ralph Waldo Emerson, believed that society is a corruptible entity. For Emerson, society impedes and hinders human creativity because society is all about conformity and following rules, values, and artificial laws. In Emerson's point of view, every human being is good according to their common sense, and every one of us has got the device to be good and show goodness. In one of his famous essays, namely Self-Reliance, Emerson stated the following: if we are all to follow our own free will and listen to our intuition, we would be much better off. We don't need artificial laws, customs, fashions, or values. He wants to point out that any human being is capable by nature to do good things in society. He is against society, and he believes that society is the enemy of individuality because it restricts distinctiveness and subjugates the human being to show his capacities and potential. Speaking of distinctiveness and individuality, one of the main figures in American history, President Andrew Jackson, who was the 7th President of the United States, emphasized on the importance of the common man. In his ideology, new ideology, self-made man, Jackson started emphasizing and giving importance to ordinary people to be a part of society. He was the first one conducting the Democratic Party, and not only the Republic one, giving the chance to normal, plain people to vote and be part of the construction of the American distinctive community. Jackson was different from presidents before him. While earlier ones had come from the Atlantic seaboard, Jackson lived in the New West, Tennessee, when he was elected. He was the first president since George Washington to have had no college education. Of course, similar to Abraham Lincoln later on, Andrew Jackson believed that all men are created equal, and it is necessary that every one of us have to consider what potential may any normal man have. The only thing that we should provide for these people to show talent and be creative and productive in society is to give them the chance and the sufficient materials or resources to be good and do good things. In dealing with nature, American romantics and transcendentalists differ in their connection and relation with nature with the concepts of the Enlightenment figures. For example, even the Enlightenment leaders spoke about nature and its relation to man, but they differed with some of the aspects, especially in American or European Romanticism. For example, the Enlightenment have seen nature as the orderly laws that govern the entire universe, as if, for them, nature meant and reflected human nature itself that needed to be tamed and domesticated. And in order to be able to domesticate the earthly nature that we know, Earth or the universe, you have to first tame yourself and abide yourself to social laws that can transform you into a better individual. Whereas the Romantics have seen nature as the powerful, unpredictable physical world that is charged with spiritual energy and meaning, in which the individual could discover himself. Nature for the Romantics is something that expresses oneness with every one of us, soul and core, because according to them, nature is where any human being will find solace and comfort. Ralph Waldo Emerson, as one of the leading figures of Transcendentalism as a movement, was known to be a Unitarian, and he encouraged the spread and the belief in Unitarianism. Of course, to be a Unitarian at that time meant that you are believing that God was one, and they were against the idea of Christianity as Trinity. So they disbelieved in the aspect of three in one, three unity, and they only believe that God is one and there is connection between man and God, man and nature, because for them man has his power from the divine, and when these two aspects align, they become one. For them, power is to be obtained by divine fate or predestination, which seem to work against the humans by exercising one's own spiritual and moral strength and emphasizing self-reliance as essential to human thinking. Of course, we said that self-reliance meant that man can rely and be totally independent from society, relying in this regard on his own potential, his own thinking, his own capacities, and his own abilities and ideas. And the generality of Unitarianism that defied predestination came, of course, from the Renaissance humanism, when religion was divided and Protestantism grew larger to reach the, let's say, main parts of Europe. Of course, in America, Protestantism started with the Puritans, and most Puritans at the time believed in John Calvin's ideology of Calvinism. Of course, Calvinism speaks and emphasizes the aspect of predestination, as if man is already predestined and there is no need to do good or try to be good, because everyone is already predestined and he is unfortunately doomed because of Adam's sin. Of course, many transcendentalists were closely connected to the Unitarian Church that focused on the idea that God was one, rejecting in this regard Calvinism. And of course, John Calvin argued that all people were born in sin. God's grace fell on the predestined, and that the rest would be damned. And this became an essential doctrine for the Puritans. Generally, Transcendentalists and Romantics disagreed with this, because for them, similar to the humanists during Elizabethan age and during the Renaissance, they believed that man is not predestined. He has got choices to make, and they can change their status. They can become better or worse, because God has given us choices and has given us abilities and the mind to think and decide for ourselves. Unitarian Church, which believed that salvation should be available to all, argued that if all humans are made in the likeness of God, then all humans were potentially good and all might be perfected. There was a transition from Unitarianism to Transcendentalism, and this was much credited to William Ellery Channing in his lecture Self-Culture. Channing believed that man has got the potential to be similar to the divine. As I have explained earlier, this was a doctrine believed by or conducted first by the humanists during the Renaissance, believing that God has given us potential, power, features, and traits from his divine and likeness. The idea of self-reliance and nature, according to Emerson, spoke about the representative man. According to Emerson, a representative man meant the individual who manages to embody in his own person a universal aspect of spirit, which is the American spirit, which was different from the European one. Americans were distinctive, unique to the Europeans, because it was all about their experience with nature, their experience with novelty, with newness. They were ready to experience new things. They were ready to apply all those ideologies and thoughts, unlike the Europeans who started, and of course historically started and were still influenced with what was preceded or what has been preceded. But Americans generally focused on their own capacities and relied on themselves in order to start and build that new nation. America was about the experience. It was real, it was practical and concrete. So it wasn't just about notions, but it was all about the experience itself. Emerson believed that everyone has to be a non-conformist. Coming back again to the idea of non-conformism, Emerson believed that people were too ready to conform to the values of others. They suppressed themselves as particular individuals. He felt that human individuality was a wondrous spiritual fact, that God meant for us to behave like individuals because each of us is wholly unique. We are created equal but different, and in that difference we can make a change. In that difference we can coexist and make things work. This is what Emerson was thinking. Of course, he was referring to being distinctive as Americans and detached from the European and mainly British ideologies. They needed a geographical independence that they got after many years struggling against the British Crown, and then they emphasized upon the linguistic independence through the first American dictionary by Noah Webster in 1882, and most importantly, they had got their own mental and intellectual independence by detaching themselves and sloughing off from imitating the British society in writings, in thinking, in behavior, habits, and customs. And of course, according to Emerson, imitation was a kind of suicide. If you cannot create, if you cannot be unique and special, then you are committing suicide. Generally speaking, American Romanticism and Transcendentalism were different from the European one by sharpening the idea of the individual and his or her potential. Of course, this ideology, along with self-reliance, gave them independence, power, and resilience. And this is what made the plain common man in American history and American culture special and unique. And this is what marked the evolution of humankind in American society, and focused, emphasized, and enlightened or highlighted the aspect of the American dream later on that still stands to this day. This is all for now. I hope you find this useful. If you have any questions, please text me or leave me a comment in the comment section below. Thank you for your attention and keep safe. Salam.